We're live on YouTube while we're setting up. But yeah, I work for Lehman Brothers during the day, and me and one of the other guys on the main show, he and I own Evape Lounge. We have 2 locations, one up in Powell and one in we just opened a new one over here on North Shore and Pellissippi.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Not in Pellissippi, North Shore and Kingston Pike. So you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's do it. Happy Monday, everybody. Everybody's favorite day of the week. Monday, and I'm not recording for some reason. Screwed that up. All right. You shut up for a second. Happy Monday, everybody. It's a Monday, so for those watching live on YouTube, you got to see me do that twice. We are Almost in Agreement. AlmostAgreement.com is up and running if you are so inclined to use the internet. We have Daniel Watson here from District 3 and the school board. We're going to talk about what District 3 is and then the joy that was that weird meeting on Friday. And so we'll talk math stuff, of course, because we can't stop talking about math for a year and a half now. We'll go into some of the stuff that's going in over the summer and some of the budget stuff that's already in the works for next year. And we're just going to talk about schools and what we can learn about Mr. Watson and the schools in general is what I'm after. So we are on YouTube Live right now. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. If you like those, follow us there. If you need to get a hold of us, almostinaagreement@gmail.com is the email address. Got SEMA Sing coming up, so I got a big District 3 day apparently today. So as soon as Daniel gets out of here, I got SEMA coming in to work on some more District 3 information. So if you're in District 3, today is your day. If not, oh well. Anyway, Almost Agreement, we're getting started. All right, so District 3. So since we are apparently doing an all District 3 day, why don't you give us the...
And it's important to note that the city district doesn't quite align with the county district. So she's City District 3.
Oh, yeah, I always forget. See, that's one of the things that, again, like we were talking in the pre-show, it's like one of those things is like, especially school board-wise, like I didn't understand how the kind of hierarchy sets up across the city county and where the city and the county have their overlaps and then their divides, and then as it's explained to me, the school board's just over here. Like they really, other than, hey, we wrote our budget, we submitted it last Wednesday, and then the mayor can make some adjustments to it. But other than that, I mean, the city can't do anything.
Right.
But the commission can just do a little bit of stuff. The mayor's office can do very little. So as far as schooling goes and stuff like that, the school board kind of is on their own. And I didn't realize that in 20 years of being a Knoxville voting resident.
Well, the other thing that people don't realize is that the school zones don't line up with the Board of Education districts. So like I represent District 3, I live in District 3, but my kids are actually zoned in District 6, Betsy's district.
Right. But I mean, as I've learned is the big thing is that it's really just a voting block in what you're district for. Once you're in, you are district wide. You're not trying to,
ideally, but that's the way I've tried to approach being on the school board, is that I'm trying to help represent all of Knox County. But certainly at times I think people do get pretty protective of their specific district they were elected in.
I mean, that's because that's who's voting for you.
Sure.
That's how elected office kind of generally works.
Well, true, except for, there's people who are in schools in my district that can't vote for me or vote against me because they live outside the district, but they're zoned in. So that's the challenge of it. Is it's not. I might have a specific interest about a school in this district, but I can't vote for or against that person anyway because I'm zoned out of it.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Because again, that's one of the weirdisms of the overlap, and it's like I understand some of the premise of why it was put there.
Yeah.
When it was put there, and it's like, especially like for me personally, I live out here in District 4. And both of my high school options that my kids could go to are District 4, I believe.
Yeah.
But like we are physically closer to one school,
sure,
but we're zoned for a different one.
Right.
And I understand over time, whatever reasons, like I know for a big chunk of it, West High School, which is what we are zoned for, they lost a lot of students to like private schools and stuff like that for a while. And so their population was down, and so they expanded the zone to get more kids in, and then. Or Bearden was having too many kids coming to its district, and so they had to push some. And so I get that trying to balance it. Like, because I learned last week from Virginia Bab that it's state law. We can't have more than 1,500 kids in a school, period.
Yeah.
And then the whole new virtual thing throws that real sideways for us trying to move into next year.
Right.
And so I don't know. Let's go back to Friday. Well,
Sure.
yeah, let's go back to Friday, and then we'll go further back in time Wednesday. That was the most procedural mess of a meeting that I think I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And in fairness, I haven't watched that many meetings, especially school board ones. I'm trying to get better at it.
Sure.
And I joke all the time. It's like, and I get it. It's for me, I got 2 kids. They're in the school district. I'm very interested in what's going on in the schools, but I also have to feed them.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, all the meetings, not just school board, but commission and city, are all like right in that kind of dinner window. It's like, let's get them fed.
Yep.
Let's get working on our schoolwork. Let's get our bags packed for tomorrow, that all kind of stuff. And that's smack dab in the middle of it. But since I was at 10 in the morning, I got to actually watch that one. And so there's 2 issues to me that popped out large. I mean, first of all, the procedure one that we were joking about. Who was it that couldn't make it?
Evity, District 1, Evity Satterfield.
Okay, and so, because I understand there was, again, this is one of the things that humors me watching meetings and stuff like that is we use complicated words for the same thing. Like I think it was we polled the school board members to see what time it was. It's like, well, we asked what worked for people's schedules. This is what the statement really is. It's like we were asking around, seeing what worked for everybody, and this was the best we could come up with. And I get that part of it, but like,
and that actually wasn't the case either. So what actually happened was we were, at least me, I can't speak for everybody else. I was asked, can I make a 10 o'clock meeting on Friday? I wasn't asked, is that the best time? Is this the time I prefer? Do I think this is the right time?
So maybe that's the difference in we asked what works for you versus polling.
Right. Yeah.
This is what's going to do.
Yeah,
Or you do
I was
it.
said, can you be there or not? And I could be there. So I was like, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So maybe it makes a little bit of sense to use the word polling instead of we.
And the other thing that
surveyed.
I don't think people realize is, at least on the Board of Education, if there's a special called meeting, that's completely in the purview of the executive committee, which is 2 people. So the board chairman and the superintendent. So the board as a whole has no authority to say we should have a meeting, we shouldn't have a meeting, or whatever. So the decision to have that meeting at 10 o'clock on that day was the superintendent's decision and Susan Horn, who's the current board chair.
Right.
And so I think, I know myself, and I'm sure the others, I didn't go in expecting not to have the meeting. But, we couldn't influence it before the meeting at all. So
Right. Because that gets to the procedural part of it. And as far as, because what was interesting about it is we never got to topic. We got to the topic of, are we going to have the topic?
Right. Which is actually true in every other meeting, except for every other meeting we approved the agenda.
Right.
The superintendent had said afterward that all the time he's been in Knox County Schools, not just as the superintendent, he never remembers a school board meeting that did not approve the agenda.
Right.
That this was a first in 40 years of his history.
I mean, and again, I mean, to me, it's. I guess I took that personally as a, we're missing somebody. We have a regular work meeting next week. This is a bigger conversation to have than on short notice kind of thing. So let's not vote on something that we don't really have desire to vote on. And so let's just do the.
Neither one of those were my reasons. And I stated it in the meeting. The reason I chose not to vote for the agenda is that the only agenda item was an agenda item that we actually voted on as a board 2 weeks prior to that. And in the meeting, I even made the recommendation, or I stated that if somebody wanted to make a motion to change the agenda to talk about our relative authority related to masking in light of the governor's decision, then I would approve that agenda, but nobody made that motion.
Right. Because again, it's like, that's the weirdism as a parent trying to watch this. Like, I get it a little better than most, but I think for most parents watching this, especially those that were on the side of letting the kids come off their masks, they're like, well, why wouldn't they already have their masks off?
Right.
And again, it's one of those clarifications. I don't think a lot of people understand how independent the school board and the schools are governmentally from the mayor's office and the commission. And so, that's what it's what confuses me about the whole thing. I'm of the personal opinion on it, and I guess I'm a parent and a county resident, so I can say it.
Sure.
I think it was we could at least finish the regular school year and have some time. We could talk about what we're going to do over the summer, because I think one of the big issues here at play is parents want to understand next week, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now. So next week, 2 weeks from now, okay, we can have a conversation about. But 2-3 months from now, we can't reasonably say where we're going to be,
right?
Because as of right now, we don't have a vaccine for under 16 that's approved for general use yet.
Right.
not to go down the rabbit hole too far, but whether or not people want to vaccinate their kids, because I'm concerned personally on whether we're going to get into a required vaccine in future years. That's where my issue is. I mean, my kids don't like the masks at all,
right?
But they're also acceptive of the concept that they have to, and so 3 weeks. Get summer going, and then we can worry about it. I just why that's what bothered me about the whole thing. It's like I understand it. I understand it from the community's aspect and the mayor's office aspect. The mayor wanted to get him off a year ago,
right?
And so as soon as he had the opportunity, he jumped on it, and I get that part. But it's not a life or death. Like that's the argument I can't wrap my head around. Is like this is the worst thing ever for the kids. It's like it's not great. I get that.
Yeah, because we didn't have the chance to discuss in the meeting. I'm not quite sure why the recommendation in the agenda was to end it right after the meeting if it was approved. That was the only agenda item, was to sunset it immediately after the meeting. And to your point, I'm not sure why there wasn't more deference to say, hey, let's have a conversation about the end of May instead of immediate. If you do something immediately after a meeting, it says that there's some sense of emergency.
Right.
And I didn't feel that in the meeting.
Right. I don't recall who it was in the meeting that was talking about one of her principals, which again, as far as the schools that are within her district, I can't remember who it was. It was a high school specifically. That principal was talking to her pre-meeting or whatever about how much that principal is having a hard time policing masks in the school. Sure. And they're like, well, the mayor says I don't have it and the governor says I don't have it. To me, that reads as you need to work on your principal skills, because there's a lot of things that the county and the state, I mean, well, I guess that's not true anymore. I was gonna throw smoking as an example, but smoking's 21 now. But it's like,
sure.
How many seniors in high school have been 18, but you still can't smoke in school.
Right.
It's legal in the state, it's legal in the county,
sure.
but it's not in the school. I mean, that's a again, there's a very simple line to me as a student in that relationship inside the school, and that there are school rules that are not county and state rules, and
lots of school rules.
Yeah, and it's like, why would that
dress code's one of those.
Right.
I mean, there's expectations for how you dress in a school, and there's expectations for not how you dress in a school.
Right. And that was one of the, I thought that was a weird example of somehow make it like, oh well, the kids aren't following it anyway, so I guess we should just take it out. Well, that doesn't make sense. But I don't know. I'm so tired of mass conversations. Like, it's been so long term. So let's get off it. So one of the things for me that was really that's bothersome, and I don't know if there's a future way we can do better at this. Like, I really kind of as I'm diving in, it's like I was super excited. I'm gonna go through this budget. I'm gonna understand it, and I'm gonna yell and scream and tell people where we're spending money that we shouldn't and stuff like that.
Right.
And budget came out. I don't know what it came out on Friday and then was passed on Wednesday.
Right.
I'm not that good.
Yeah.
That I can get through that much stuff and understand any of it in 5 days.
Sure.
I again, I understand that there was a public meeting prior, but
even that was only a week and a half or so before the board meeting on it.
And to me, it's like this baseball conversation is a good example of it. Is everybody's talking about how the parts and pieces of this baseball stadium are working, and the standard reply, especially politically, is, well, nothing's in writing yet. We don't have an official proposal yet.
Right.
And that same premise on this budget situation, it's like, well, I don't even have a framework to start looking at.
Right.
Until we have the budget. And I would like personally to have a little bit more time to go through said budget and understand it, because like I talked to Ron a little bit about it off, privately through emails and stuff like that. But other than having him come and sit down with me for a 6-hour episode, which I'd be happy to do, I would enjoy it fully. I don't know how much you guys would enjoy it listening to it, but to really break down all these little subsets, because even in that, like, it's departments and it's like, this is our HR budget. And it's like, I understand that should be the hugest portion of it, but one of the things I get in arguments with parents a lot is teachers don't make enough money.
Right.
And it's like, well, how much does the teacher make?
Right.
Well, they make this and that. It's like, well, which ones? Like, it's like, it's a range like any other career profession. There's ranges of payments from experience and education and stuff like that. But I hate the flat statement of either teachers don't make or the school board doesn't have enough money to use or something like that. I hate the flat statement. And so, like, it's one of those, I've talked about it all running up into budget season. I am fully open to the idea that the budget is good.
Sure.
But I don't understand it enough to figure out if I agree with it, whether it's good or not. And so, because again, on the state level, like, that's what's really getting to me now. The further I'm getting into it, is the relationship of our county and our school board and the state's ability to really just do what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost feels to me like it's not a fully, but it's a very the school board locally is more. I don't know. This doesn't mean I don't mean this as an insult, but it almost feels like we're letting you guys take care of yourselves, but we're really not. That's how I feel like the state's over their shoulder being like, see, look, we gave you representation, but when it comes down to it and we want something or really don't want something,
right.
The state's really the chief. Because, I mean, again, the virtual school, if I understand it correctly, 1,500 elementary, 1,500 middle, 1,500 high school, that's a reaction to something going on in Memphis that the state doesn't like.
Correct.
And since it has to be universal, we have to deal with it too.
Right.
And like that's one of my things that I'm getting on is like, how do we as a community push back on the state's over control, for lack of a better word, of our schools? Sure.
Yeah, there's not been as much autonomy in local public education as there has been obviously in decades past. And education finance is a difficult issue. It's complex. I mean, right now I'm actually getting a certificate in education finance from Georgetown University simply to be a better school board member.
Right.
Because it is a complex issue. The thing that I have related to the board, and I elevated this at the meeting related to the budget, is I think in the when we say we want to try to provide transparency, I think people often don't agree what transparency means.
Okay.
And so the school system currently says, hey, we have a public meeting about the budget. Anybody can come and talk about that. Well, the problem with that is it's a week and a half before the budget actually gets approved. We know that the budget gets worked on all year round. And at that point, I think people don't engage in that process because they know at that time, there's nothing I'm going to say as a citizen that's going to impact the numbers on that page at that point.
Right. And that's assuming that I, as a citizen, understand what that subsection of the thing that I want to do and how that impacts the whole budget.
Right. So what I think needs to happen from a public engagement standpoint is we need to be providing on-roads for the public to engage in the budget throughout the year.
Yeah.
Because it is getting worked on all the time. And although, yes, at some point we have a higher degree of confidence about what our revenue is going to be than another point, we can still elevate concerns and ideas and thoughts from the public all throughout the year to be able to help inform that budget along the way.
Well, because what's very clear about it is that the projection is $542 million in revenue this year. The budget is $542 million.
Right.
It's like, well, again, I understand the general premise of everybody wants more money in the schools. So if you're making the budget, you're going to make it as close to that. But it's like, well, if we're working on it all year and we don't have the projections for next year, how are we so good at getting exactly the entire estimate of revenue into the budget if we don't know that yet? And so it's obvious there's a lot of stuff moving at the end as well to make sure that we're filling that, because obviously this year for 1,000 reasons has been anomalous, especially budget wise, because we fully expected to have a lot less revenue than we ended up having.
Yeah, nobody would have guessed.
And so assuming moving forward and we're working on the budget throughout the year, we're going to be trimming against, I don't know, I just, like I said, I feel like if we're working on it throughout the year, it should have been, I would have assumed it would have been lower than what it ended up being. Because more accurately, that's $17 million average increase or so instead of the fully doubled $34 million that we ended up going up.
Right.
Even though it's an understandable one, it's just skipped a year in the regular rate of growth.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's like, well, how did we get through this year cheaply, even though this year should have been more expensive with all the extra stuff we had?
Yeah. What I saw in terms of reaction from the central administration when it came to the budget is when their revenue projections came in higher, they saw it as an opportunity, and I think rightfully so, to address some things from a strategic plan standpoint that we haven't been able to do in the past.
Right.
Which is, one of the reasons why social emotional learning was such a high priority, and also special needs students was a high priority, because those are things that we've consistently been not able to do to the degree that we want. And to your point about teacher salaries, I think it's important for people to note that if you compare 4 or 5 industries, like all the way from medicine to education and others, that teacher salaries is the one industry out of some of the major industries where their income growth is over their whole career, where most industries end up plateauing somewhere in their late to mid 40s, where the income growth is not so high. And so what's interesting about that is we tend to put much more money, because we often give percentage raises in education, much more money into teachers in the latter part of their career. And one of the interesting things I think we need to look at and consider is not necessarily taking away from teachers at the latter part in their career, but actually potentially increasing salaries at a higher rate early in their career, because we know that we have so much turnover in teachers.
Right, that's a retention. Right, helps with retention among other.
It helps. Yeah, it helps with retention among other things. But we often don't do that. We often set a flat percentage rate, and then we have step increases on top of that. And so what you end up doing is getting a larger and larger gap at the top, and you end up giving more people more money at the later stages of their career, which I'm not saying they don't deserve that, but what I'm saying is that doesn't help people stay in the game.
Right.
So
we don't get those long-term good teachers to stick around because they can't afford it.
Right, because we only have so much money, and so we're taking the bulk of our money and giving it to people later in their career instead of reorienting some of that and saying, hey, let's see what we can do at the beginning of the career to keep people in.
Right, that makes sense for sure. And again, one of the things for me, and it's become kind of my hot topic on school stuff, is we have this mountain of things that we think that we have the schools responsible for.
Yeah.
And I think there's a number of things that I believe are substantial community issues that need to be dealt with and need to be looked into and need to have assistance and stuff like that. But they end up on the schools. Like the kids that don't eat otherwise. Mm-hmm. Some of these different items that end up in the schools where, like I saw a meme the other day, and it was the teacher, and they had written all over them all the different jobs, social worker, cook, and all the different stuff. And it's like, and it hit as accurate to me. And it's like, because again, having all these conversations with other parents and stuff like that about how much teachers make, it's like, well, if they were just teachers, it might be a reasonable number. But since they're not just teachers anymore, they're all these other things. And how do we maybe address those? Because again, if we're going to talk about the broader budget, how many of those need to be in the schools?
Right.
I understand parts of it. Maybe it's easier to do it in the schools because that's a place that we have access to these children.
Sure.
Instead of having to be mobile with whatever it is to go to their homes and stuff like that. But at the same time, just because it's the easy way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way, most efficient way, the right way, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I've been putting thought into, and again, not being able to, not having the personal ability to really understand the parts and pieces of the budget to go, well, hey, that could be something that we as a county pay for, but take it out of the school budget so that we can have books and stuff.
Right. Well, yeah, and we need to continually be better as a school, as public education, to be better partners with other things that are happening in the community. And I think we've seen some of that locally with our community schools. That's been an attempt to say, hey, in these particular schools, how do we bring really good things from the rest of the community into that space and not demand so much from the school itself?
Right.
And I think that's been a good model. And my wife is a teacher, so she's an educator and works at Beaumont. And I've seen all the things. She's not taught consistently, but has been a teacher for 20 years now. And one of the things we also need to be doing in our higher education of teachers is, sometimes I think people are getting into the teacher profession these days right out of college, and feels a little bit like a bait and switch. It's like, oh, I went to school to learn how to teach math, but now I'm in a school and I've got to do these 10 other things that I'm not necessarily being equipped with in my higher ed.
Right. My sister was special ed all through college, and she had 3 years before she ended up in just a regular 4th grade class.
Right.
I don't know how much of that, again, there's some time in there for her to learn some of the systems and stuff like that, but certainly it's a different, there's different stuff taught. And I don't know, because that's one of the things that when I was talking to Virginia about teacher salaries and stuff, it's about different certificates and stuff like that, and that because there is no standard starting pay for teachers, which makes sense. But at the same time, it's like, are we hiring by the teacher, or are we hiring by the job filled? Mm-hmm. And there's a difference there, and I don't think a lot of people think about that, is that, well, we have this really well-qualified teacher, but, she's teaching a standard 4th grade classroom. Right. Well, is a 4th grade teacher make X, or is it a person with all the degrees and certificates makes X plus? Right. And I get it on both sides, because it's unfortunate for that person to make less than all the extra education they had, but we as a county paying for these school teachers, we need to pay by the job, in my opinion.
Well, and our salary schedule in education, and certainly in Knoxville for educators, is way more complex than other industries. There's a lot that goes into deciding what this one particular teacher will make versus this other particular teacher. Some of it has to do with the length of time that they've been teaching. Some of it has to do with any raises the system can give. Some of it has to do with what school they're teaching in. Some of it has to do with what population they're teaching. And so it's a fairly complex system and model, and one that probably needs to be reevaluated to make sure that we're getting the right teachers in the right classrooms.
Right. Yeah. That's that's kind of the general point of it, is that it concerns me. It's just one of the bureaucracy things to me, is like, and again, not understanding a lot of it. It just feels like there's a lot of parts and pieces, and this is the way things used to be done, and so this is the way things are done today. And how often are we reevaluating and really breaking down some of the standard ways of doing things? But then again, the other question of it is like, how much are we allowed to,
right?
And how much is going to state let us,
sure,
and those type of items. And so one of the things was funny. I'm on the Speak group on Facebook, and some guy from WVLT was like, hey, anybody want to talk about the budget? And I was like, sure.
Right.
And so I just used it to plug the podcast. It was great. And so he was making a big deal, and I didn't see this in the budget because I didn't understand it well enough, is that we're having a hard time with getting resource officers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pay issue, is at least what he implied to me.
Right.
That's the first I'd heard of it specifically. So is that something that we are actively trying to figure out?
Yeah, so right now we have 105 positions in our school security officers, and we have 85 of them filled. So right now we have a 20% or 20 positions not filled. What I understand historically is that typically toward the end of a school year, that's when most of the positions become filled. So people are like, hey, I'm going to go do something else during the summer, and may or may not come back or whatever.
Gotcha.
And so they take off. What happened in the budget and what ended up getting approved is that a lot of our pay in education is based on contract period of time.
Right.
So SSOs had a 200-day contract prior to this incoming budget. And in the budget, we approved a 21-day increase to that contract. Obviously, that helps their salary. The other intent was to help provide more opportunity for paid training during the summer, where we keep some of these folks involved during the summer in actual school security, going to events and things like that, but also doing some different professional development and increasing in training. But what I've consistently heard from Russ and Chief Padusis is that the turnover rate even throughout the year is pretty difficult. And especially with a position like that you want to be trained in a specific way, and you want them to have a specific posture and approach into their work in a school system with safety and security. To me, that's a position that we need to figure out, how do we retain the right people? Yeah. Because if you constantly have turnover, the fidelity in which they're operating in the school is going to be hard.
Right. Because that's one of those things that's in a broader law enforcement kind of situation, is like getting that the longer they're there and the better they are at it, the better relationship the kids have with them, right, and they get to grow through with the kids. And that's one of the issues I think that we have as a society in general, is that we don't get to have any relationship with our law enforcement. They just come and go,
pop in and out as needed.
Right. Yeah. You only interact with them when hopefully when you don't really need them, but right, when they're around. And then, next time there's something that they might happen to be around, 9 times out of 10, it's a different person, and not being able to build a relationship between those. And I think that's I think that's for sure. So again, I interrupt with that. I apologize, but
yeah, you're good.
But again, the implication from the thing was that it was a pay issue that we're having. So adding the days, so it's not. So essentially, currently, it's a almost full-time job, but not quite full-time job. 221 days a year. That's
right.
140. So it's about. I mean, that's about a full year.
So the other thing that people need to realize, though, is that both with educators and with our SSOs, I believe this is true of SSOs too, is that we pay that their benefits package is for a full year. So, for instance, a teacher who, let's say, just teaches during the school year, and then they can go off and get another job during the summer if they want.
Right.
They still have insurance through the school system, so we're providing an additional benefit where we're not expecting that person to go get benefits somewhere else. So they have an opportunity to make some additional income in another space, and actually that employer has the benefit because they're not having to pay a benefit. And
they have the option, right? They have the option for their salary to go 52 weeks or go the 40 weeks or whatever. They can have it.
I'm pretty sure that's the way it is currently. That's the way it used to be. I know for sure, where they could decide, because my wife had that decision where she could decide whether or not she wanted to divide it by 52 weeks or divide it by the school year.
Right. So because again, like I that's one of the jokes, and I don't know how much I stand behind the joke or whatever, but the joke is they get paid X for 9 months.
Right.
Where I get paid X for 12 months.
Right.
And so there's a difference in the job. But again, going to find a job in the summer, depending on what.
Well, and then what an educator will tell you is that, yes, they get paid for 9 months, but they would say they're working way more than 40 hours a week in that 9 months.
Right.
So
that's fair.
Yeah.
All right. So we did a little bit of budget, a little bit of masking, a little bit of security. That's the big stuff going on right now. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is we have city elections coming up. Where are you in cycle?
So,
Are you 22 or 24?
So I'll be 24. So
okay,
yeah,
so you just got here.
September. Yeah,
Check.
is when
All
I
right.
started. Yep.
So because I messed that up with Virginia Bab, I thought
Yeah.
she was a 24, and so I didn't let her do any campaigning while she was here. But she's a 22, and so I don't know. Like, how does that work for you as far as the politics of it? Like, as
Yep.
far as actual like getting into. Like, I don't know. It's a weird position in what we normally look at in politics. Like, we normally look at it's a much more legislative. This is making rules and regulations and stuff like that for the general public, not for a subsect of the public.
Sure.
And like one of my assumptions is, and I've talked to Chris Davis in the Election Commission about it, is how little people pay attention to school board races.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Me, top of the list of people prior to now.
Right.
So how's that experience been as far as dealing with the politics of it and how much effort and stuff like that into actually racing?
Yeah, so I didn't pay very much attention to it till I decided to run, which was actually back in probably mid 2019 is when I decided to run. And I ended up ultimately running because for the last 14 years, I've been trying to help impact individual families' lives through the nonprofit that my wife and I run, and felt like it was time to refocus some energy to affect the systems that impact those lives. So for me, it was about moving further upstream. I didn't get into it because of a particular board member or an issue or anything like that. I didn't even know Tony, who's the incumbent that I beat out prior to running for school board. The thing I appreciated about it was, for the most part, people honored that it is a nonpartisan race. I think it should be a nonpartisan race. I'm actually wholly an independent. I voted Republican in my life. I voted Democrat in my life.
And you're probably theoretically a felon in the state of Tennessee, but that's a separate thing.
So that was good. And I will say, and I think people get this, is that campaigning is very different than actually being an elected official. And I treated that by saying, in my campaign, I stuck much more to what I value as a leader and as a person. And I tried not to get into particular issues unless people asked me questions about them. And that's because my agenda in getting elected was not about a particular issue. It was about bringing a set of values and a set of questions to a pretty complex system that most people don't understand.
Right.
And what I've tried to do consistently on the school board is ask questions that other people aren't asking. I don't presume to have all the answers, but I think unless we're willing to ask a different set of questions, we're going to have a fairly narrow conversation, and that's not what we need in public education. So.
Right, and I mean, again, that's to pat myself on the back. That's a little bit of what got this rolling a little further, because it's as I started looking for information, it's the same subset of people talking to the same subset of people having the same conversations over and over and over again. Not talking and not willing to ask some of the questions, because I've gotten into some sticky conversations in here with some different people, and it's like we've kind of slowly built this society where having a sticky conversation is weird. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, it's weird, but it's not bad. Like we need to have the conversations, because we're not going to figure out how to interact with certain things if we don't. Like, I mean, I had Randy Pace on a little while back, and it was one of the first times I had the video system set up and stuff like that. So I was pushing it. I was like, hey, we're going to be live on YouTube today. Check us out. And like, I got a bunch of stuff like, why would I want to watch? Why would I want to listen to him?
Right.
It's like, well, like him or not, he is part of this game here for us locally. And if you want to be part of this game here locally, you need to know who else you're playing with. Right. And like that general attitude is what scares me about the future of our politics. And as we've gone through the crazy presidency we've had and the stuff like that, we are growing this idea of just not listening because we assume what this person's going to say. We assume the direction we're going. And there's history to it on a number of people that's like, well, they always say the same thing, but we need to figure out how to break that up and get out of it.
Well, and I think it's incumbent on elected officials to do a better job at helping people understand the nuance of the issues. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, one of the things in public education that I hear all the time is that some schools are underfunded. That's the statement, is that this particular school in this particular community doesn't get enough funding. And that may be true in some situations. In Knox County schools, what we actually do is there's a $10,000 swing between our lowest funded school and our highest funded school. Now, the reason we've done that in Knox County Schools, and I think it's appropriate, is we've looked at that school versus that school and say, this particular school has a different situation, a different context, a different set of kids, and they need more funding.
Right.
Now, and people sometimes understand that, but what people often don't connect then is, okay, well, what is that money doing relative in that school? Is it getting the outcome that we want?
Right.
And what you'll find, and because there's now databases that do this, is if you plot the amount of spending in a particular school in Knox County, it's actually done at a state level, but you can drill it down, in Knox County relative to its outcomes in a 4-quadrant scatter plot, what you'll find is there are schools in every category. So high funded, high outcome, low funded, low outcome, but there's also low funded, high outcome,
Right.
and high funded, low outcome.
Right.
And so what that should force you to do is say, if throwing more money at it doesn't get the outcome we need, now what? But
Right.
that's not what the conversation people want to have. People will say, well, no, we need to put more money in it.
Right, and I think Ron said it best when he was in here. The first time he was in here, Ron McPherson was talking about it. It's like there is a clear distinction between the what was the I can't remember the exact term. It's the percentage of students, families below the poverty line with amount spent, or the inverse. And basically, it's like it's inversely. It's a perfectly inverse relationship.
Right.
The less money the community, the less money the families make in the community that surrounds the school, the more money that school gets.
Sure.
Like through the different system. It's so, but the inverse being the higher average income around a school, the less money that school needs to do and check the boxes or hit the outcomes that are desired, which is a whole separate other super complicated thing that maybe we can jump into in a second on what these metrics are of success. But what it seems to be in general, and that's again one of the things when I get into conversations about how much teachers are making, how much we're spending in the schools, everybody argues more bigger budget. It's like, well, the data doesn't seem to prove that, to suss that out, to say that more money makes better outcomes.
Right. Now, but the inverse is also true, that there is a point in which there's too little money, you can't get the outcomes.
For sure.
And so you got to figure out where that line is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A candidate last year, we were talking about it, was saying that sort of thing, and I said, well, I was like, is there data that says that more money and makes better outcomes? And then she came back at me with, well, it's pretty clear that a high school that is a one-room schoolhouse versus a multi-million-dollar campus, that multi-million-dollar campus is going to have a better success. And I was like, that is the worst example I think you could ever throw out. Absolutely, I agree. How many one-room schoolhouses do we have in Knox County?
Right.
How many one-room schoolhouses do we have in the state of Tennessee?
Right.
So how about real to lots of money is the conversation we need to have, not the 1880s version of school to now.
Right.
And so it drove me crazy when she threw that out there. But and again, but the idea being, it's like, yes, there is a low number, but there is a high number that it doesn't change once we pass it.
Sure.
We could spend $1 billion into school and it's not going to get past.
Yeah, there's
a
a point of diminishing return where you actually don't continue to get advantage but that number is hard to figure out depending on the context that you're in too, because it changes. I don't think it's universal across the board.
Right.
So,
and I think that's to me, that's what especially in the budget and this virtual school thing, is I'm understanding how much really this comes down to what the state decides they want to do. And it's like, well, it's very clear that it's very specific and there's very subset factors inside a very small region that are going to make a difference to how this school functions. Mm-hmm. But 2.5 hour drive away are the ones making the major decisions on how this thing gets to go.
Right.
And they're doing it for how many schools we have in the state.
Right.
It's like, and again, I'm a libertarian at core, I guess, and I'm the more local, the better. If we're going to do it, it should be here. We don't need DC and Nashville telling us how to function. Right. And this is the conversation that seems to clarify that to me. It's like, we need to ask the state for permission to do this and this and that. And it's like, we talk about metrics and goals and stuff like that. It's like, I get the idea that a 3.0 high school graduate from the state of Tennessee should mean something, whether it's Knox County, McMinn County, or Shelby County.
Right.
I get that should mean something sort of universal, but how much more does it cost us to make sure that means something universal than having solid outcomes for all three places, because they have better local control of themselves, instead of having to go through all the bureaucracy and mess of making sure the state makes sure that means something, instead of letting us suss these things out ourselves, because we're better equipped to understand what the issues are and how to get after them than half a state away.
Right. Yeah, and you can't do this from a policy standpoint, so I'm not suggesting that, but in terms of a practice standpoint, I think it even should get drilled down further, which means I think we need to have more ability to meet specific kids where they are.
Yeah.
I know my 3 kids, they have very unique academic aptitudes, challenges, barriers just in one family. And if the approach to each one of my 3 kids is universal, the same, they're going to be very different outcomes.
Right.
So.
Right, and I think one of the things that I think like third grade reading's a thing, and then whatever our graduation rates, whatever the current matrices we have in place,
And a new term that's thrown out all the time is ready graduate. So that's a new thing the state is looking at.
And what does ready graduate mean?
Well, it means lots of things. There's about 5 or 6 different things that said if you can meet these particular things, then you're considered a ready graduate, and it's beyond just test scores.
Okay, well I'll have to look into that because I'd like to, because again it's like what how much of the conversation is being had of, my kid, I got a 10 and 8-year-old, so I'm looking at 10 years down the road. These are adult dudes running around. Whether they stay here or not, that's up to them. But if they decide they want to stay in Tennessee or whatever, they're paying they're paying taxes. They're going to pay the thing. That's the point of this game, is that we want to grow functional adults that go out and work and pay taxes and buy things because we're in a sales tax state. Mm-hmm. And so what is the actual metrics? What should the actual metrics be to whether that's a success or not? Because they make more money, they make less money. Right. I don't generally think this way because it's not functional, but like, is there a happiness factor that we could put in there, that they enjoy their lives, or if they're just out there doling away, stamping license plates or whatever.
Right.
And that to me is one of the issues, is that I don't feel like I understand what we are calling success as a school community. And maybe it's out there, but if we as a community don't understand and agree on what that is, then it doesn't matter what it actually is. We're not going to see it as a success because we don't understand what that end game is. Right. And so that's something for me that I'm trying to figure out. Because I agree that I'm fully ignorant on a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that it exists and I just don't understand it yet. But that's one of the things that I'm looking for. If there's something and you can help me out, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So, personally, I think when you look at a very high level, so a state, for instance, and you're thinking about outcomes and policy, I think you have to have some way to set a bar to understand, relative to the resources that we're putting in, what's the basic outcome that we're getting. And the way we're doing that is state level testing. I know some people are completely against that. I think we have to have it, but I think we have to figure out what's the benefit of it and make sure that we're using it appropriately. Now, but then you also have to get into what the specific testing is designed to measure. So I think in any human system, which education is certainly one of them, I think ultimately what we need to be looking for is growth in that human system. Mm-hmm. Because if we try to expect everybody in that human system to get to the exact same place, we'll never be satisfied, because people don't get to the same spaces. And
or at least in the same time frame. Some people take longer, some people do faster.
Right, but also we have to acknowledge that people don't start out in the same space.
Right.
So when we talk about expectation management, we can't say, all right, well, these 30 kids who have started off in very different places, if we put them through this same system with the same resources, then we're all expecting them to get to X.
Right.
That's not reasonable. That you can't expect that. But what I think you can expect is to say, let's put these 30 kids with very different backgrounds and very different contexts into the same system with the appropriate resources in that system for their specific circumstance, and then let's expect growth in this particular direction.
Right. If we start
to a high degree.
Right. Whatever number they started with after, from kindergarten to third grade, we want it to be a +7, whatever random number system used to measure it. Obviously 7's probably not a real one, but yeah, I get what you're saying for sure. Because, again, the most important thing in education to me is the ability to learn.
Right.
It's not whether I can multiply or divide. It's that I have the capacity to understand a new thing and then figure out how to use it effectively.
Right.
Not, like history class is the worst for me because I don't remember my specific dates. I always hated that in history class. Right. But those lessons of what history is moving forward is what was really important about it. Whether whether whatever war ended on whatever date, that's a way to get it into the brain. But that kind of premise of if we can prove that they are learning,
right,
that is the win. Not that they know what day Washington signed some document.
Well, and there's enough research too that says, so a universal marker that people look to, and this is third grade reading level.
Yeah.
Well, there's a tremendous body of research that says if a student doesn't hit that mark by that time, then the amount of investment that we pour into them relative to the rest of their education is not going to have near the effect as if we would have taken that same investment or less and poured it in actually to pre-kindergarten education.
Right.
That's the place to put the most investment. That's where you get the most return. And I think that's one of the conversations we need to be having in public education is we've traditionally defined public education as K through 12. Mm-hmm. Do we need to redefine that? Is there a need to say what we know is that if we're not helping kids get to, if we're not putting the investment in early enough, then it's very difficult for most kids to make that up later in their career. But that's continually what we do is we start pouring in those investments later in their career.
All right, that's something I have to put some on. Because I definitely had some kids in kindergarten that were really, really solid readers and stuff like that. It's like, how did you do that already? And where we were right in the middle, and then there were some kids that were barely getting through their alphabet that were in our classroom.
So my own circumstance. So I went to kindergarten twice. The only grade I repeated. So my the only objective from what I remember about moving to first grade in kindergarten for me was I had to know my ABCs. Like if you knew your ABCs, you're good to go. I didn't know my ABCs through my first year. That's because a lot of things in my backgrounds, socially and in different contexts. And so I just played around my kindergarten year. I had to repeat kindergarten. Now, in between those two kindergarten years, my grandmother actually taught me to my ABCs. So my second year, I got to mess around too. Well,
right.
well, from that time on, I was always a little bit more ahead than my class, but it's because that investment was made really early on. I'm not advocating for kids not advancing, but what I'm saying is that, like to your point, if kids aren't at that base level at the right time,
right,
early on, then it's going to be very hard for them to ever catch up. So,
okay. Yeah, again, I'm sorry. I got sometimes it just pops out and pops in. Going back to all right. So we have a regular meeting Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, it's a workshop.
Workshop
and a regular
Wednesday.
meeting the following week.
All right. So assuming the master can come up, which means you have another whole week, and then by the time you put that in place, you sunset it for a week later, and then the school year's done, and we don't have to worry about that part anymore.
Right.
I don't know. This is an observation. It's not necessarily a school board specific thing, but I find it very. Okay, let me change the direction and ask the question this way. To your understanding, is there a clear procedural what constitutes an interruption of a meeting?
Oh, like in a public meeting, like
yeah,
at the
like
school
what
board?
the rules are for. Because I mean, I know you guys have a mountain of like procedural like.
So we have a policy that talks about public forum and the decor that's used and things like that, and this came out actually in a meeting last month. So one of the things that people can't do in public forum is they can't address individual school board members. I mean, I think the reason that policy exists is because when you get into personal one-offs, then that can get easily heated and things like that.
Right. Or it's I go in and I address Virginia because she's my school rep,
Right.
and I've had conversation with outside of her, but in the moment I'm not talking to her specifically.
Yeah.
I'm talking to the group.
Right. You need to talk to the body.
Right.
You need to talk to the body as a whole. So I don't know the details of our specific policy in terms of interruptions and things like that, but certainly what happened at the end of this last school board meeting on Friday, I think would constitute as something that crossed the line. Now the meeting was technically over, but that didn't make it any less or of a safe situation just because the meeting was over.
Right. And again, I understand it has nothing specifically to do with you or the school board for that matter.
Right.
But is again this weird year that we've had and all the different stuff. It's like I don't know. Like I'm certainly never going to be one to say that people can't talk or even express themselves or even be a little bit interruption-y. It's just
Sure.
There's a line somewhere in there that I don't know. Again, in a transparency conversation, and again, this is as much on us as residents as it would be on any board or commission or whatever, as far as having a clear line of like, this is when it crosses the line where you need to be removed.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's an odd spot we're in right now, just because we've just had such a hot year on everything.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think in the past, have you had a school board meeting well, no, you just got in, so you've lived the COVID experience as a school board member.
Right.
So
that's all I have at this point.
I don't know, and again, I didn't pay that much attention before, but I feel like I don't know that I've ever read a story about somebody getting arrested at a public forum of any body meeting prior to this year. And then again with the whole, as I went like an idiot, I was going to try to be on the Board of Health for a minute, and I went to one of those meetings and sat there for 9 hours.
Yeah.
And all the different anti-mask groups and everybody yelling at each other and stuff like that. Just trying to sit and watch. And which is, again, that's another thing that got me further into this, because as I understood it, the commission didn't have to, I still don't understand if the commission was allowed to do what they did or not, but it was such a weird conversation, because at the meeting I was at, they were asking for a community member to join the Board of Health.
Right.
And originally that was supposed to be the first reading of the dissolution of the Board of Health. And it's like, why are we doing both of these things at the same time? You're killing something, but adding somebody to it at the same time. But watching all the people get upset about it, and it's like, there's a number of public forum events that I've seen where it's people are yelling at the wrong person.
Sure.
And that's another one of the things that's kind of diving me deeper in. It's like, I'm trying to understand who the right person to take my issue with.
Yep.
Because again, I could have a problem with my principal, or I could have a problem with some of the curriculum that my kids are doing in school.
Yep.
I still don't understand if that's a you issue or if it's a state issue.
I had this conversation with a constituent on the way over here, actually, related to the mask issue. And one of her big concerns was the fidelity in which the mask policy was being followed in individual schools. And, we talked through that. And what I reminded her of was all the board can do is set the policy. We don't govern the actions of individual principals and administrators. That issue is to be taken up with the superintendent's office. If you feel like an individual school is not following whatever policy it is, that's the place to take it up. I'm happy to hear them as an elected official, but at the end of the day, I can't go in and sit with that principal and say, hey, you got to follow, you got to do this thing the way we said. That's the superintendent. And so I think your point's valid about people understanding where the levers are to be pulled depending on what my issue is.
Exactly. Because it's one of those, I'm really upset about this thing. Something needs to happen about this. I want to voice my opinion on this. And then I go and yell at city council, and it's like, well, city council has zero to do with school stuff. Right. So that'd be the absolute wrong target. But, it's for a lot of people, that's the one thing they know. And so I would assume that even further than that, I would assume that's probably 75% of the either mayor's office emails are people coming at them with a lot of stuff that isn't theirs, and hopefully that office is doing a good job of
routing it,
of rerouting it because I think Larson J said it best. It's like, I think 90% of my commission job is being a telephone operator. It's people come to me with stuff, and I have a little bit better access of finding out who the right person for them to talk to is. And so it's an interesting. It's been really interesting trying to dive into it. But that to me is one of the goals I have, is I try to help people understand. What the right body is to talk to about your situation, because it's super complicated, with all the different overlaps between school board, sheriff's office, commission, mayor's office. That's just the county, and then we have the city subset, and then we have all the state stuff, and then federal, which I don't care about. I wish they'd go away, but they exist, so we have to deal with them. So all right. I always like to ask as just a standard thing, because I like to poke holes in the media locally here, because I don't think they do a great job on a lot of issues. Outside of COVID stuff, something that's gone on this year in school board, something that you and the other school board members have worked to push through, that you were happy, excited about, something that you wanted to see happen that maybe we didn't hear about out here in parent land.
That's actually tough to answer given the amount of time we've talked about masks. Honestly, I feel like that has absolutely been the overwhelming predominant issue. And I don't think it's provided us enough space to get into the things that we really want to talk about. A subset of that, which I think is being elevated to the board as a whole, is I'm really encouraged about where the DEO is headed. So there was a public meeting about the Disparities in Educational Outcomes task force that happened, I guess 2 weeks ago now, or a week ago. And that work has been in existence for about 5 years, and it's about to be elevated. And I think it's appropriate, and I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think we're going to see more and more things come to the board relative to that work. And we've also made a good move to not focus on disparities this year, or discipline this year, but to say, let's bring the conversation around disparities around academics too, to where we're talking about, what are the disparities relative to discipline, but also let's acknowledge the fact that there are some groups of our students that by and large, are not meeting, are not getting to where we would hope they would get academically.
Right.
And how do we have some specific solutions for that? And I think Shannon Jackson and her team has been really good at helping to dig into that in terms of the academic arm. So I think both those things are really good. I also think we've had some good conversations about how to engage the public more in terms of the budgeting process, and making sure that we're hearing. But my view as a school board member is that at the end of the day, I can't make good decisions unless I understand the concerns and the issues of the public.
Right.
And so I think we need to be more attentive at providing access where people not just feel like, but actually have a real opportunity to make a difference.
Right. Because on the budget one specifically, like, again, I understand it takes a while and they work on it all year, but like, is like a grander skeleton that we're filling in the fine points as the year go on would be something that I would be interested in seeing. Something that's like, our targets are this percent of the budget goes here, this percentage of the budget goes there, and then what. More importantly to me, like what some of the departments actually break down specifically. That's the stuff. Because again, like I was talking to Virginia about it, and she said that I think at one of the meetings you had brought up the idea of maybe doing a couple of different ones in a couple of different schools, so that people from the different communities, it's a little easier for everybody to access.
Right.
And whether or not people would show up, blah blah blah. I don't know if I'd show up either because, like I said, it's in the middle of dinner. But
Sure.
But for me, I'd prefer something in writing.
Yep.
I think something that we could get again, like some sort of skeleton, some sort of breakdown, and maybe even a good flow chart. So like this goes into here, and then it splits up here and there. It's like
Right.
All the way down to like if we take the transportation budget, bam, big number. But then how much of that is bus drivers? How much is that equipment? How much of that like that'd be something that I'd be interested in looking at, because I think that's something that is more palatable for me to break it down and be like, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Because when you say $2 million transportation budget or whatever it specifically is this year, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that.
Right.
And some of that could be ridiculous. Some of that stuff like, well, are we budgeting an extra X percent for gasoline because gas prices are going up?
When sometimes the number doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, so the fact that we have a $500 million budget in education in Knox County, for most people, we have no concept of what a $500 million means, right? So we have to be able to boil that down. And what I'm really pushing for us to do is to talk more about our budget relative to per pupil. Because those are numbers that we can.
Ooh, I don't know. You might be careful with that one.
Why is that?
Well, because like you get to. I mean, I guess if you say per pupil countywide, I get it.
Right.
But
on average,
would you get into per pupil by school?
No, I'm talking about.
It gets real funky.
Yeah, I'm talking about on average.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, what we're doing per pupil. Because one of the things that we hear all the time is that we're overspending in certain areas versus other areas. I think that's because people are looking at that total dollar amount of, let's say, $15 million, and that seems high.
Right.
But when you break that out as a cost per student,
right.
$15 million
over 60,000 kids
is pretty low.
Yeah.
And so I think we would do more for the public to help them understand how does this trickle down in a way that we can all easily understand.
See, I don't know, because again, this is one of my running jokes. I do it all the time. It's like I think this year's budget's about $9,000 a kid.
Yeah,
average. I believe the state says per first graders you have to have one teacher per 20. So give me 20 first graders and give me $180,000.
Yeah,
I can go hire 2 teachers, pay them like $65,000 a piece.
Yeah,
still have plenty of money left over for a building and all the other stuff I need.
Right.
Because that again, you're not wrong. I agree with you 100%. But for my brain, when I try to figure it out, I go $180,000 a year for 20 kids.
Yeah,
should be able to do that fairly easily. That sounds like a lot. That still sounds like a lot, I guess, is my point.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think people don't take into factors all the different parts and pieces, me included, especially in my kind of generic, $180,000 premise. All right. I mean, that gets through most of what I wanted to get through. Like, I don't have a particular format. I don't have a specific, I wanted to talk about the mass thing. I did want to talk about the public forum part for sure.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about budget, and even though it's already in past tense, which I hate, and I got to start trying to dive into the whole county budget now, which I'm not going to have time to do much with. We're going into next year. You got you're not campaigning yet, so I don't have that part to talk about. I'm trying to run through my list. I think that was everything I had.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to get through before we call it a day?
No, I appreciate you doing this, though. I mean, I think it's great, and I don't know what your base is like in terms of how many folks you got listening, but I do think that people have the most opportunity to affect change at a local level, but that's only to the degree that people understand how it works.
Yeah.
So I think what you're doing is fantastic.
Well, I think on that, just to brag on myself a little bit, but I mean, like how much, you've been at this for almost a year now.
Yeah, about 9 months. So.
I mean, how often do you get contacted by media?
By the media, probably once a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for a quote at best, though?
Often it's mainly for understanding. I haven't been quoted much yet, which I'm good with.
Because I get a lot of our listeners get on me for how long our show's on, and your show's going to be average. We do 2-hour plus shows sometimes too.
Right.
But like I think the soundbitiness of the way the media works is one of the problems.
Oh sure. Oh totally.
It's like
yeah.
Because I went and I did, like I said, I did the 15-minute interview with WATV. I was on TV for 13 seconds.
Yep.
And it's like I talked about a lot of stuff. I freaked him out. He was not ready for somebody who understood the budget as well as I do, which was not much, which is the sad part.
Right.
But he was like I don't know. It felt to me like he was really trying to. I couldn't figure out what his narrative was.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like his narrative was that the $500 million budget was too much because he kept phrasing it that way.
Right.
And it's like, well, if you're going to do that, it's more than $500 million because it's $542 million.
Right.
But then at the same time, he goes into this whole thing about the school or about the resource officers, about how we don't pay them enough. It's like, well, which avenue are you running here? I'm really confused.
Right.
And I was like, who wants to be a school resource officer? It sounds like a terribly. I don't know. I love my kids, but you get me around 50 kids, I start losing it, especially at elementary school level.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I got. Daniel, I appreciate you. This was fun. We'll need to do it again.
Totally.
We'll wait till I'm gonna let the school board simmer for a little bit because we're going into summer. So I'm gonna take summer break on you guys. But that's a show, everybody. Woo! Daniel Watson, everybody. We talked about a lot of stuff. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to myself talk for a little bit to make sure I didn't miss anything in this conversation. We are Almost Agreement at gmail.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. You can find us at almostagreement.com, which is our website. Has all the episodes on there, except for a handful of the backlog I haven't finished loading in. It's Monday. Slow down. We're also available on all major podcast providers if you prefer to get them off of iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or any of those guys. If you have anything you need from us, anybody you want me to talk to that I'm missing in conversation, Almost an Agreement at gmail.com is the website or the email. And I'm just going to shut up. I'm having a bad case of the Mondays. I give up. We're still technically